podcast. My name is Melanie Nevis.
And I'm Tegan Aline.
And we are exploring fairy tales. We're continuing our little exploration of fairy tales. And we we often touch upon Disney because Disney's kind of touched a lot of fairy tales.
It's kind of our basic frame of reference, right?
Because it's what we grew up with.
It's our gateway.
And yeah, exactly. It's what we grew up with, especially in North America. And Disney kind of took fairy tales, especially at the time that we were growing up, largely from Western European tradition. And then it kind of started to expand a little bit later. But when we were like 4 to 6, let's say, a lot of this stuff was coming out. And it had that European-centric view more so. But we know that Disney's kind of taken this wholesome, magical spin on fairy tales that tend to have darker origins. And we've discussed stuff like the Little Mermaid fairy tale with Hans Christian Andersen and how it didn't exactly end happily ever after. And Cinderella's wicked stepsisters have a much harsher punishment and cruelty in Perrault's version. And Peter Pan is what we're going to be talking about today. Peter Pan is no different.
This is a really, really good one. I didn't think of this one originally, which is like I was telling you before. It's not like there's something about this story that always makes me feel uncomfortable, and I can never really put my finger on it. But I do like it. It's interesting. It's just that I'm also kind of like, ugh.
Yeah, and I think I do agree with you, and I understand where the ick comes from. And I asked you like right before we started it, I'm like, what's the ick factor for you? And
okay,
you said it was the Lost Boys.
Yeah, it's the Lost Boys. It's just that concept, which is not like an ick, I guess, so much as it's like kind of sad, I guess, that they're lost. Yeah. But I think again, my brain is slightly twisted on it because I did see this take once that was like really dark, and it was like, what if like Peter Pan is the one kidnapping all of these kids from their families, and like Hook is the only adult in Neverland and he's the one trying to get them back, or something like this. It took a really, really dark turn to make it almost seem like Peter Pan was like the bad person for taking these kids away. And
the original version of the story is a bit dark for sure. And part of that is with the character of Peter Pan. And another part of it is actually based on the author and the things that he went through in his life to develop these characters, I think.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Ooh.
Yeah. So it's got some autobiographical elements, which is not surprising because authors take a lot of things from their own life and then kind of put this fantastical spin on to it. But for those of you who don't remember, the synopsis for the Disney animated film is that Wendy and her 2 brothers are amazed when a magical boy named Peter Pan flies into their bedroom through the window in pursuit of his rebellious shadow, because remember, he's always chasing his shadow in these movies. And he has a fairy friend named Tinkerbell, and they come from a faraway place called Neverland, where children remain forever young. And Wendy and her brothers come, and they're kind of like, they come enchanted, and they follow Peter Pan back to Neverland. But when Pan's nemesis, the pirate Captain Hook, causes trouble, the kids kind of begin to miss their old life. And basically the story ends with Wendy and her brothers going home, but the Lost Boys don't really go with them because they aren't ready to grow up yet. And Peter and the Lost Boys return to Neverland on the pirate ship, and Wendy and her parents watch through the window. So this boy who never grows up is magical and mischievous in Disney's rendition. His true personality in the original book takes that a little step further. So The Little White Bird, written by James Matthew, or Barrie, J.M. Barrie, in 1902, strays into kind of dangerous territory with Peter Pan's character when it comes to how he treats others.
Interesting.
And like I said, but it still kind of seems like there's some inspiration for the story that may have come from his real life.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1867, James, and I might call him James or Barrie again, depending on what comes to mind, because it's J.M. Barrie. So we'll see what happens. But James lost his older brother named David in an ice skating accident the day before he would have turned 13.
An ice skating
James was only...
Okay.
Yeah, so he was probably skating and the ice was thin. And
yeah, at first it was like, how can you even have an accident ice skating that causes death? But then I was like, wait, if they're on a pond.
Yeah.
I'm too Canadian.
Yeah, and
too used to a hockey rink, okay?
What are you talking about? We skate on the lake if it's cold enough.
Oh, I've never done that.
Yeah, you could skate on Lake Ontario if it's cold enough.
Oh, God. I would be scared. But anyway, okay, yes.
So James was about 6 years old at the time. His brother was turning 14. That was a pretty traumatic loss early in life.
Yeah.
And it probably had a really strong impact on him. But something that people also don't talk about is that James had 2 younger brothers, and they also died in their infancy as well. So
oh my.
I think that from a young age, he probably felt like death kind of followed him wherever he went.
Yeah.
And can you hear my cat? Is that why you're making faces?
I'm so sorry. Not only can I hear her, but I can see her jumping behind you from like the sink to the thing. And every time she jumps, she's so like,
bad.
She's like, brr, brr. So she's just going nuts behind you. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to be distracted or make a face, but it was really funny.
Such an asshole. Anyway. Hi.
She's just in the back like, look what I can do. Look at me.
Yeah, every time I get on the computer or like on the phone and I start talking to people, she will sometimes act up and be like, pay attention to me, I'm here.
Sorry, it was just like the combination of being able to hear her jumping from like all nimbly blimbly from tree to tree and like
God. But if I ever shut her in a room or something, or like shut the door of a room, it's worse. Because cats, they sing the song of their people all the time.
They sing the song. Do you hear the people sing? Another story for another time.
Okay. So yeah, I think that James kind of thought of his brother often, especially his older brother often, and kept returning to this concept of childhood and really held it sacred. And later, like much later, he was in his 50s and he basically became friends with his neighbor's kids, the Llewellyn Davies boys. And this was kind of explored a little bit in the 2004 film Finding Neverland, but not explored very accurately in that. But basically, it's a relationship that is fairly well known among anyone who's familiar with Peter Pan's origins. And when he was a kid, like infant mortality rates were high. There were always instances you'd hear of like kids falling through ice and drowning and things like that. And yeah, I think he probably thought that death lingered around him, and it definitely impacted him. All right, so J.M. Barrie, he began the story of Peter Pan in his 1902 novel, The Little White Bird. And like I said, it's semi-autobiographical. It's a tale of a man becoming enamored with a little boy who he wants to steal away from his mother. In order to befriend the child, he makes up the story of Peter Pan, the fairy, and the baby bird, or the fairy bird and baby who live in London's Kensington Gardens.
This sounds kind of creepy though, no?
It is. And I think that, again, like, I'm not sure. I'll kind of go into Barrie a little bit more.
Yeah.
There's a lot of debate around him as a person and his relationships with the Llewellyn Davies children and things like that. But
Okay.
basically, in this story, Peter Pan is a week-old baby when he leaves home, and he never ages past that marker. He believes that his mother will always leave the window open for him. So he plays really happily with the fairies and with these magical birds that come to him without fear of losing her affection. He always thinks that like he can go and come back.
Mm-hmm.
But when he finally makes up his mind to go up to her, like at one point he leaves, and when he finally makes his mind to come back, he finds that it's too late. The windows are barred, and his mom is cuddling another baby. And in this story, her love is very much conditional, and he's been replaced.
Oh, sad.
So that's kind of how Peter Pan starts out.
That kind of harkens to Hook. I think I remember this storyline in Hook a little bit.
Yes, it's like, it's a very tragic portrait than what we normally think of. An important aspect of Barrie is that he kind of becomes obsessed with this concept of eternal boyhood. He, like his brothers, were lost really early on, and he didn't get to see them grow up. But he himself also never had children. So, like I said, he spent a lot of his time in the late 1890s, early 1900s with Jack and George Davies, who are his neighbors' kids. They were about 4 or 5 years old at the time that they met. And yes, critics and biographers have been arguing for decades about whether or not there was anything sexual about Barrie's affection for the boys, and the question has never been fully settled. Most of Barrie's contemporaries actually describe him as being asexual. Though he was married twice, he never fathered any children of his own. And Nicholas, who was the youngest of the Davies children, said, "I don't believe that Uncle Jim ever experienced what one might call a stirring in the undergrowth for anyone, man, woman, adult, or child. He was an innocent."
You know,
so
what I was thinking is, obviously, of course, you would be concerned about that, but also I think it sounds like somebody who was stuck in the trauma of losing all of his brothers, and probably trying to somewhere like psychologically recreate that. Of course, that could also get twisted, but it also really tracks with like the whole Michael Jackson thing and Neverland and all of that whole mentality.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
Right? And one of the youngest of the Davies children, Nicholas, basically did say Uncle Jim was an innocent.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like he never did anything wrong. So the Davies children, their father had died in 1907 from cancer. And like he and his wife, not Davies and his wife, Barrie and his wife, again, would go on vacation with this other family and their kids, and like they would do stuff together all the time. And so when the Davies boys' dad got sick, he started spending a bit more time over there to help them out. And then a few years later, in 1910, their mother was also getting sick, and she also died. And at that point, James Barrie, he was 50 years old, he altered her will to suggest that she meant him to take guardianship of the sons rather than their nanny. And in that way, he kind of fulfilled this dream of the narrator in The Little White Bird, because like both of their parents had died, and rather than the nanny getting guardianship, he kind of altered the will so that he could get guardianship. And
he
so
altered this woman's will?
Apparently.
That's sketch.
Yeah, so he ends up becoming a guardian for these kids.
Good
and
golly.
Ends up raising them.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But no one has ever said anything, like nothing has come out about this relationship being anything other than literally a father.
Yeah, but when was this that when did they go on record talking about it?
I forget the exact year.
But was it like
it was when it was after
early 1900s?
No, it was after he had died and everything. He was like, no, he was an innocent. Where the youngest child said he was an innocent.
Definitely murky water. Definitely.
It's murky water, and that's why no one has ever agreed on anything. No one's ever agreed on anything. But the Davies children would live with Barrie for years, basically.
Wow.
So yes, before he became their guardian, he was a friend of the family. He and his wife vacationed with them, and they would play with children around the lake, and they would create these tales of pirates and fairies. And uh, at the beginning, Peter Pan is this infant, and as the boys in real life, the Davies boys, grow up, he kind of makes Peter Pan grow up slightly. And so the later version of the story he writes in 1904 becomes a play called Peter Pan, or the Boy Who Would Not Grow Up. And then in 1911, Barrie turned the play into a book, which was originally titled Peter and Wendy, and then it just became known as Peter Pan.
Interesting.
And that's the book that we usually think of when we talk about the original Peter Pan, but it's still a bit removed from the original.
Wow. Wowie, wowie.
Yeah, so it's definitely like there's some murky waters. There are some people that are really adamant of like, no, we think he was asexual. There's nothing proving otherwise. Like the children stayed in contact with him until they passed away, or until he passed away in certain situations.
It's just like the timing. Because like it's not like people talked about that kind of thing back then. I don't know. I don't want to be doom and gloom. I don't want to assume like every dude is a pedo. You know what I mean? Like I don't. But it's scary, you know?
It is scary. I think he was largely, like you said, stuck in his own trauma. We'll never know.
Also altering a woman's will who wasn't
That's just hers. What one source said. That's what one source said. We don't actually know for certain
that he did that. How could he even get away with doing that? You know what I mean?
It was a different time. True, it's ambiguous. It's all a little bit ambiguous because some sources say one thing, some sources say another. So that is a possibility.
That is a fact.
We know for certain that he did get guardianship of the kids.
Wild.
And then he raised them after that.
Wild. And then kind of grew the story as they grew.
Yeah, I mean, like before he even got guardianship with them, he was creating stories with them when they would be on their vacations, like just running around the lake with the kids. Kind of and he never had kids of his own with his 2 marriages. He never did that.
Yeah.
And it is interesting then that you have the youngest of the Davies boys saying, like, I don't think he felt a sexual stirring for anyone, man, woman, or child, ever.
Which might explain why he didn't have kids. Because that's also like a why. If he was so into kids, why didn't he have them?
Yeah, a lot of people think that he just didn't have that sexual desire.
Oh, I can see it being really like... I'm too tainted by the internet, man. I can see that being a freaking dark rabbit hole. But it's funny, though. I didn't know any of this. And this is always the vibe that's given me the... when it comes to Peter Pan. So that's very interesting.
So with the actual story of Peter Pan, like eternal childhood, you know, sometimes you look at kids and you're like, ugh, to be a kid. I honestly am always like, ugh, to be a cat over ugh, to be a kid. But I get it. Facts. Because
you still do have to deal with some semblance of issues as a kid. Maybe not so much as a cat. Cats, you can just
like if you think about eternal childhood, like you're naive to the world, but you also have this sense of wonder. Everything is brand new. You have this play, this genuine just sense of play about you, and you want to play, you want to explore, you want to do these things, you have questions. But it's not as perfect and glossy as it seems, and it's precious because it's short, right? That is why it's precious. Can you imagine just being a kid forever? Like
no,
it doesn't.
I don't think
it doesn't track. You want it to last as long as it can, but at a certain point you have to grow up. But when it comes to Peter Pan and his existence in Neverland, never growing up can be dangerous, not exactly for Peter Pan, but for people surrounding him. So instead of this mischievous and ultimately good-hearted boy that we know as like our Disney take on the character, Peter Pan in Barrie's novel is a less well-meaning jokester and more of this just darker supernatural entity almost, with a strange fixation on control. So, in addition to focusing on all the good parts of never growing up, he also really resents and holds a bitterness for anyone who shows signs of growing up even slightly. So, he doesn't just battle pirates, he kills them without hesitation.
Mm-hmm.
And considering the fact that pirates, especially Captain Hook, he seeks revenge for the loss of his hands, regularly attacks Peter Pan, fighting back is completely understandable, right? But
Yeah.
Peter's disdain, I guess, for adults leads him to turn on his own friends too.
Mm.
And here's an excerpt from the novel. The boys on the island vary, of course, in numbers, according as that they get killed and so on. And when they seem to be growing
Casual.
up, which is against the rules, Peter thins them out. And what that is saying is that Peter kills the lost boys to keep them from aging, basically.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. My red
He
flag beacon
also,
is on.
yeah. He also periodically alters the lost boys' bodies so that they can fit through the 3 holes that lead to their underground lair, because he can't tell the difference between pretend and real life. Like, he is a super flawed character in a lot of respects, but he doesn't know, as a child, he just doesn't know the difference between pretend and reality. So he will, we were talking about this before we started, one of the favorite scenes in the movie Hook, because I love the movie Hook. One of my favorite scenes, one of your favorite scenes.
It's like the only rendition of Peter Pan I really like. Yeah. It's Hook.
Yeah,
Yeah.
same. Is when they're having the pretend food fight and they have this
Yes.
table and all of a sudden the food appears and they have they have a food fight. In this book, Peter can't tell the difference between real life and pretend. So he sometimes gives the Lost Boys pretend meals and then just refuses to believe that they are still hungry.
Oh, wow.
So
Okay.
the Lost Boys really face this profound danger throughout the book and throughout the play, because Peter tends to find the danger entertaining rather than frightening.
Yo,
He
red
always
flags, red
saves
flags,
them.
red flags. It
Yeah.
sounds creepy. Okay.
Yeah,
Very,
he
very
always
freak.
saves them, but it's less because he wants to help them and more because it will give him another opportunity to celebrate his own cleverness.
This Peter Pan sounds like a fucking psychopath.
Yeah,
Deranged.
little bit, little
Oy,
bit.
oy, 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 oy.
And because Peter Pan is obsessed with being a child forever, he embraces everything childhood entails. And one of his favorite hobbies is to search for new games. And with nothing to structure his life, the boy who never grows up is also just the boy who never grows. So he's described as being incredibly forgetful because he just can't learn or adapt as well as humans, because his memory is slippery and weak because it never reaches a certain threshold.
Traumatized.
Like, you need to develop your memory and your skills as you grow up. And he
Yes.
refuses to do that.
Okay.
So being a child forever means he can't ever realize what he's missing. It means he can't live a life to the fullest. It means he can't understand the difference between reality and pretend.
Mm-hmm.
He just is a petulant child that tries to control the people around him, even using death when he feels he needs to in order to keep his Neverland intact. Like, he doesn't develop emotional skills. He doesn't develop empathy. And as starting out as a lost boy himself, where his mom kind of like shuns him and makes him go away, he never feels that love. He never feels it. So, like, to him, everyone in his world is just a plaything.
See, this is the part where it makes me feel weird about the author, because if we know that the author had like severe trauma, and we know, like, this is a big disclosure to everybody, but my mother actually lost one of her brothers when she was a little girl. He was dragged by a train on train tracks for like 4 miles or something like this. And it was devastating. Like, my mom's family was in the paper for it. and her mother
Mm-hmm.
never recovered from
No.
losing one child, and really
Mm-hmm.
started to isolate the other kids. And there was like 5 or 6 more of them. And she really
Mm-hmm.
isolated all of the kids after they lost her brother. So if a woman loses 3 children, like, you would isolate the kids that are still around, I would think. Psychologically, like, there's no therapy, there's no working through any of
Mm-hmm.
this stuff. And the whole not being able to differentiate between reality and non-reality, it sounds like, whoa. And but what I
I
wonder, but what I'm curious, I want to ask you is, do you think like like Peter Pan is a forewarning in this story? Like like,
I think that it's honestly him dealing with his childhood trauma of him being really upset that his brothers never had the opportunity to be children or to grow up
okay.
either. Like some of his brothers died in their infancy. One of them was just about to turn 13. So they never had the opportunity to fully live their childhood lives and they never had the opportunity to grow up. And so it's his concept of kind of like, I think he's trying to deal with this turmoil that he feels over witnessing and not witnessing that and is
Mhm.
almost like stuck in this loop of trying to process those emotions and what that feels like.
Mhm.
But I'll go into Barry a little bit more because he is very different from Peter Pan in his personal life. He
Okay.
was entrusted with a lot of responsibility and actually did take it on. He was entrusted to raise these boys. Someone else also entrusted him to adopt some other kid, I believe, or like take on responsibility for something else because he was actually a really well loved person and seemingly a good guy. I think that this was his creative outlet for dealing with his trauma and is not necessarily indicative of how he would have acted in real life, if that makes sense.
Uh-huh. Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, I don't know. I don't have the
Yeah, I
opportunity to
know.
ask
Like,
him, obviously.
honestly, I don't know if you've ever read the book Lolita, but it's giving me like Lolita for boys, right?
Interesting. Okay.
I don't know why. It's just like this weird feeling in my body. Anyways, I don't want to like bring it there, but
Well, I think the other thing too with Peter Pan as a character, like, he's obsessed with being young and youthfulness. He's also kind of obsessed with death. There's
mhm.
a lot of elements of death and like I think it's more the aspects of death that are kind of more related to Barry's own childhood
Mm.
loss and like losing his siblings. So, his work includes scenes of Wendy nearly dying after being shot with an arrow, of Peter being left to drown, of Hook being eaten by a crocodile. And like one of the novel's most famous lines is when Peter Pan says, "To die would be an awfully big adventure." And
Mm.
so I think that it's like this combination of really his trauma of dealing with it and it's not just an obsession with childhood. It is largely an obsession with death.
Yeah. And where does Wendy fit in all of this? Because Wendy's
Okay,
there.
yes.
Okay, sorry, my
Yeah, Wendy is there. So like there's no, it's okay. Um this emotional weight kind of comes to a head at the end when Peter meets the adult Wendy who is really helpless and guilty and she feels so strongly that she should remain a child for Peter's sake and for
Oh.
the sake of the child that she used to be.
Mm.
And by growing up, she's basically abandoning Peter just as his first mother did. And so this causes Peter to cry, but not for long because Wendy grows up, which means that she has a child, Jane, and then Jane is the replacement for Wendy. And so there will always be another daughter in this line where Peter can like have this motherly figure for a little bit, but always he's reliving his own trauma. Always Peter is abandoned by this motherly figure, right? Because they always grow up. So yeah, it's really, really weird. There have been so many versions of Peter Pan in the years, and in 2017, Christina Henry published Lost Boy. And in this version, Peter Pan isn't like the spirit of eternal youth. He's basically a cult leader, like a really evil cult
Okay.
leader
Yeah,
who
facts.
lures young boys away from their families periodically starves them, drives them to murder each other in a game he always calls battle.
Lord of the
And the
Flies.
boys in this version of the tale, they both adore and loathe Peter and fear him in equal measure because they're alone on this island of Neverland. They have no way of returning home, and they have to follow him because he's their only protector.
Yeah.
And it's it's a little
Oh,
bit consistent
yeah.
with Peter Barrie's characterization of Peter, but again, Barrie would never look at the perspective of Peter from the perspective of a lost boy, because he didn't create the lost boys to be characters with their own perspectives. Like they are objects in the game.
Troubling. That's trouble. Isn't
Yeah.
that troubling for a guy who adopted a bunch of people's kids? Ugh, I don't know. I'm so sorry,
Again,
but
but he's like there's aspects of his life that are reflected in the story, but then he also took liberties with it. Like it's not all based on his life, right?
well, that we know.
So
But
like
I mean, there's way too much like
there's definite parallels, and that's where like a lot of the darkness does come in.
yeah, for sure.
However, people do use literary tools as like a way to sort through all of the shit that they're feeling.
We'll never know. We'll
And
never know the
we'll
reality
never
behind it.
know.
But I can understand why many people may have their backs up around this whole thing because it
Absolutely. Yeah.
feels creepy.
But like again, Peter is a child. So like
Yeah.
if you have a child and you don't actually teach them morality, you don't teach them empathy, you don't teach them these skills that they need to live in the world, Peter as a child is like this selfish, petulant child. He doesn't recognize the Lost Boys as people. They are toys. This is his world, right?
Definitely.
He was abandoned, and this is his world to. And I do kind of wonder if at a certain point growing up, Barrie maybe felt like that because maybe his mom was so traumatized with the loss of all her other children that he felt abandoned all of a sudden.
I
Because it can kind of
definitely,
go
yeah.
two ways.
Yeah.
It can go where then the parents are super cloying after that and they want to protect their remaining children
Helicopter
and
parents.
kind of hold close and
Yeah.
become overbearing, or they're just so stuck in their own grief that they're no longer a parent, and you have this kid who doesn't know what to do and feels neglected by their parent and feels like they've had their back turned and they don't have anyone to help them, and they have to navigate these murky waters. And I feel like maybe he felt like that growing up a little bit,
Yeah.
and he needed other people to come around to help him, but it wasn't his parents.
So
And so
in my healing practice,
mhm,
we know neglect to be the worst possible trauma
mhm,
that can exist for
yeah,
people.
yeah,
But also I just realized I think the whole I don't know how I don't know how my brain was like putting that together in that way, but I realized just hearing the parallels between the stories that immediately I was like, Peter Pan is a version of his psyche, and that's what makes it feel. That's what I'm feeling. I don't
yeah,
know that it's true, but that's why I think it was scaring me when you look at the reality of his life versus
yeah,
the story and all of these
yeah.
kids that he was playing with and doing all these things with. Meanwhile, how Peter Pan is acting in the story. Anyways, I think that's why it makes it feel so weird. But
Well, it's tough though, like because I'm like, was Peter Pan as it's written very much a reflection of him as a child and how he was feeling at that point, and then he did grow up and realize that it was wrong, and so he's trying to kind of instill morality in these other kids and make sure that they're not led astray in reality.
yeah, like
But like this is very much,
in
yeah,
his book, is Peter Pan a cautionary tale? Is it written so like Peter Pan is a warning, or is Peter Pan the guy? You know what I mean? Like I guess that would
yeah,
like, but
yeah.
which is it though? Do you know? Like, how is it?
It it's Peter Pan is innocent and heartless, and no one truly matters beyond himself in
Hmm,
like the book.
that's interesting. So I wonder if it reads like. So it sounds like it kind of reads like a for a warning.
Kind of.
Like, be careful of
Yeah, I think so.
somebody like that,
I think
right?
so. So, and like the importance of like, it's fun, it's all fun and games to be a kid, but at a certain point, you do need to grow up and you need to face
This
reality.
also makes me think like the Hook rendition is quite interesting because obviously
Mm-hmm.
it's not the traditional Peter Pan story, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
Peter Pan decides to grow up and forgets who he
Yeah.
was. So it's like a totally different take on it actually. But
Yeah.
that conversation about you do have to grow up at some point is like in
Mm-hmm.
there, you know, and that
Yeah.
it's not all bad, which is true
Yeah,
because there's a lot
exactly.
of responsibility being an adult, but then there's also a lot of freedom that comes with being an adult,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That you don't
Exactly.
necessarily have as a child for obvious
Yeah.
reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah. And the sad thing too is like, yes, Peter Pan became an icon, right? Peter Pan became a really well known story and play. The sad thing is that the Davies children, most of them actually, their lives were pretty short and tragic themselves. So, George died when he was only 21 as a soldier in World War One.
Mm.
Michael drowned when he was just shy of his 21st birthday in 1921.
Just casually
Of
drown.
what they, well, it's some people believe it's a suicide. Some people drown. Like we don't know. John died of a lung disease. Someone else, like yeah, it was just the only innocent, which was Nicholas, called Barrie an innocent and survived of natural causes, or he died of natural causes in
Like,
1980.
was he an innocent or was he just too young to know anything?
I don't know.
Or was he the
Well,
innocent? Was Nicholas the innocent, you know?
no, he was saying that Uncle Jim was an innocent.
No, I know. I know what he
That's
was
what he said about his
saying, but I'm
uncle.
just
Yeah,
wondering if
yeah.
he was too innocent to know. I don't know.
I don't think so. They lived with him for a while, so I don't know.
Well, a
But
random drowning is kind of like, again, what?
I mean, if people don't learn how to swim, people would drown all the time.
You just said that this guy was with them playing pirates on the lake since they were little kids. Like, this guy, nobody ever taught this one child how to swim? Doesn't add up.
You never know. You never know. Like people would go out fishing, but not necessarily know how to swim all the time.
PSA, you're not supposed to do that. Don't go fishing if you don't wear a life jacket and don't know how to swim.
They didn't have those.
I'm
They
like
didn't necessarily
yelling
have
into
those.
the mic like it's gonna make a difference. But don't take
But
your
yeah,
don't take your kids on a boat if they don't know how to swim and aren't wearing proper shoes and a life jacket.
it was a different time. But yeah. So yeah, Peter Pan, there are similarities to be drawn between Pan and Barrie for sure.
Hmm.
But Barrie in real life did seek out responsibility and he did care about other people. And he was a godfather to, that's what it was. So he met an explorer named Robert Scott at a dinner party and they became really close friends and he became a godfather to Scott's son. And after 2.5 years, Scott, as an explorer, was freezing to death in the Antarctic. He wrote to Barrie asking him to watch over his wife and son, and be that person for them. So like. He was often still regarded as someone who did care about people and grew up in real life. Like in reality, he grew up and was a caring person. So I don't know.
So is Dexter. But anyway, I digress. That's not even that wasn't even a real person. But still, anyway. Okay, all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. So there's a lot of controversy around Peter Pan because
Yes,
no one
so.
actually knows. No one knows if this was just like a literary thing for him to help deal with his trauma. There are definitely, it does harken back to some
It's just so
things that he
bizarre.
went through.
Yeah, it's bizarre
But
to
then
me that yeah.
he was an adult and acted as an adult and cared about other people and people seemed to trust him with their kids. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just funny and very interesting that like maybe it's my what's it called, bias, because I just always had a strange feeling about it since I was young. So
Yeah.
and I feel like the more you tell me, the more I'm like, what? Like,
Yeah, but I think it does serve as like you said, a bit of a warning of like you can't stay young and in this ignorance forever.
well, that's good at
At a
least.
certain point, but that's the moral of Peter Pan, really. Like
Okay.
he always goes back, and the Lost Boys go back with him. But Wendy and like her future children always come back because it's always time for them to grow up.
Yeah. It's weird.
But yeah, he's definitely like a delusional, petulant child and doesn't recognize anyone in Neverland as, you know, being a real person with thoughts and emotions. They're kind of just characters on a or like chess pieces on a board game.
That's giving psychopath energy for reals, though. Peter
Yeah.
Pan.
Yeah.
That green outfit
So
never convinced me.
yeah.
Where does
So that
Tinkerbell
is
come
the
into
story.
play and all that?
Oh, she's around, but like
She trying to act as a
she's around.
conscience like Jiminy Cricket?
Not really. I
No?
think that they're also kind of stuck with Peter in their own way.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, they're the ones that got him to Neverland in the first place, though.
The fairy. Oh
In the
yeah,
very
that's
first
right. The
rendition of the
fairies are
story,
playing with
they're the
him.
ones
Yeah.
that kind of, yeah, and so it's because of the fairies that he leaves, but then when he decides to come back, his mom's like, "Nope, sorry.
Yeah.
I've got nothing for you anymore." It's like his own psyche was very damaged by that
Yeah.
in the story itself, you know?
Yeah, of course. Well, like,
Yeah.
yeah, the reason why they say, and like the energy work that I do, the reason why they say neglect is like probably the worst trauma. Like, there's a bunch of core traumas that happen to people, but neglect is one
Mm-hmm.
of the worst, if not the worst, because it's not just like a person. Basically, neglect very much indicates that a person chose to stop
Mm-hmm.
caring for you. When you're a
Mm-hmm.
child
Mm-hmm.
and your parent chooses to stop caring or stop paying attention or stop whatever, that's a
Yeah.
whole different psychological and emotional ball of wax than like, you know, we can have like abandonment issues that are very still traumatic and valid, but also you can potentially at some point see that there was other situations, there was other things involved.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't justify it, you know that's there. But neglect is very much a choice, it seems like,
Yeah.
which can really damage people. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow. Wow, wow,
So
wow.
heavy.
Whoa.
Yeah. Peter Pan. I still like Hook though. I still like them.
I almost want to watch Hook right now. I really like that movie. And also Robin
Me too.
Williams. We love him.
I know. I know.
Yeah, we miss
I
him.
know.
I love him so much. Okay. Well, I feel
Yeah.
like I have been so triggered in this episode. I've never been this triggered, and not an entire episode that we ever
Really?
recorded. Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I feel so triggered by it. Obviously, like I was like, Tegan, stop drawing it to this conclusion, and then my body was like, I can't stop. It doesn't feel right, you know.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things that don't feel right. I'm trying to be a devil's advocate because, like, it definitely tickles my senses in a not great way. But I'm trying to be like, but we don't actually know.
Fact is, we don't know. We'll never probably know. I definitely think a modern mind might draw some very sinister conclusions out of that whole story. But yes, it's true. We don't really know.
Yeah. We've also grown up in a time where our childhoods, for the most part, obviously not everyone, are relatively cushiony and safe, and we don't have to deal with mortality and infancy deaths and children dying.
Right. But we also have grown up in a time where we have enough access to like resources and like help that we understand that the people before us didn't, and what that can do to people.
Exactly. So it's like, we I don't know, I guess we just have a very different way of thinking about things as well.
Yeah,
It could have
for sure.
just been something as simple as a literary tool to like deal with his own
grief.
psyche.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Or
Let's
it could have been
hope.
worse.
Let's fucking hope that's what it was. Let's just hope
fingers
that that's
crossed.
what it was,
Yeah.
and nothing more. And I hope nothing happened to those poor children who lost all of their parents in real life, bizarrely.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah, they both got cancer. So
cancer. Yeah, that'll do it. That'll do it. Well, I don't mean to laugh at that. Peter Pan, I feel uncomfortable.
yeah. So we'll just wrap it up here. I hope that you have all
definitely, guys.
Enjoyed is the wrong word, but tolerated this.
Not even tolerated. Just like tell us what you think. I think we would really like to know what you got. What do you take from all of this? Like, what do you reduce this to? Like, it would be interesting to know. I think I'm mystified right now.
I know, not surprised then that there's this author that tilled a modern rendition where she made him a fucking sinister cult leader, because
that tracks totally.
It tracks. It's not hard to get from point A to point B, but
yeah, for sure. Moral of this podcast is Hook is your best rendition of watching this story with like a safe, healthy context in it. Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Ironic.
So reach out to us, Allegory Story Podcast at gmail.com, and follow us on Allegory Story Podcast. And there's a falcon. And
magical day in the skies today.
I know.
Yeah.
And we will see you next time. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Have a good day. Hope this didn't traumatize you too much.
We'll see you soon.
Oh man.